At Wheels Through Time, there are hundreds of motorcycles and dozens of cars, each with a story all of their own. From the rarest antiques to the most iconic styles, we are dedicated to telling the story of these old bikes.
Well, a live history show at Wheels Through Time is always a lot of fun. I'd like to thank the great crowd of people here, including my friend Daryl White from the Indian Museum of Australia, who also brought some of his other mates from Australia. Also, I've talked to some folks here from Seattle, friends of my friend Jerry Shin. And for all of those that have been here to Wheels Through Time before, thank you very much for coming. If you've never been to Wheels Through Time before, I hope you're having a great time. The history show we're doing today, the live history show, is about this 1915 Indian Model D1. Call it a board track racer, dirt track racer, call it what you like, but it's probably the only known Model D1 in existence. The bike was repainted probably 50 or 60 years ago and has such a great patina on it. And I've owned the machine for quite a few years, and I've always enjoyed owning this bike, but I really enjoy running this bike, and that's what we plan on doing today. The process of running this bike, if you're wondering why we have two motorcycles here, this is a 1936 Harley-Davidson. It's actually a factory prototype. We raced this bike from Ottawa, Canada to Mexico City in the 1995 Great American Car Race. Almost won the big prize. Followed up with this bike in '96. Raced it from Tacoma to Toronto. And always a great starter bike and a favorite bike of mine to ride here at Wheels Through Time. I've used this bike to start many board track racers and it never fails. Daryl will be operating the Harley and I'll be sitting on the Indian, and I really think this bike's going to run. But a short history of Indian, starting in 1901, the founder of Indian, Oscar Hedstrom, and his partner George Hendy. Oscar Hedstrom is really known to me as the inventor of the American motorcycle. There were other bikes that were built earlier, but Oscar Hedstrom is the man who put the moat in motorcycling way back in 1901 and made a bike that anybody could buy and ride and operate. It wasn't very long before Indian became the largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world, building over 30,000 motorcycles, I believe, in 1913. At that time, Harley-Davidson, that had started a little bit later, and the dozens and dozens and probably hundreds of other motorcycle manufacturers in America were all competing for the target market. The average guy that wanted a motorcycle for sport, utility use, and Indian really led the way in commercial sales. And probably somewhere around 1909, I think Indian hired a fellow named Jake DeRozier as the head of the racing team. He was a top-notch rider, and Indian was prominent on the board tracks for many, many years. Harley-Davidson didn't actually start racing until 1914. It's kind of another story for another history show. But by 1914, Indian was actually on the decline. Harley-Davidson had really captured the market. Many of the other smaller companies that didn't have the manufacturing or capabilities or were capitalized to build a lot of motorcycles, nor did they have the distribution system. So the real battle was the big three, Harley-Davidson, Indian, and Excelsior. Indian, located in Springfield, Massachusetts, had a massive factory, a giant workforce, a very reliable workforce, and they had Oscar Hedstrom, the chief engineer and designer, who everybody that worked for Indian was completely loyal to. He managed the racing department, sales department, and was really responsible for the real glory days of Indian production. As Harley-Davidson started improving their product around 1914, Indian realized their tried and true engine, called the Hedstrom engine. If you look at this engine on the bottom, it says the Hedstrom engine, named after the guy who designed it, Oscar Hedstrom. Didn't say the Hendy engine. Hendy was more of a salesman and an entrepreneur promoter. But Oscar Hedstrom was the real genius behind the Indian motorcycle. So somewhere in 1914, it became very obvious that they were falling behind and a new engine design would have to be created, leaving Oscar Hedstrom's pocket valve engine, and I'll explain that in just a moment, kind of to the wayside. In 1916, Indian actually developed what's called the Power Plus engine, a side valve engine similar to this on the bottom, completely different on the top, much cheaper to manufacture, became more reliable, and in the long run was actually a much better engine. But really in the glory days of Indian, the Headstrom motor was the fastest thing on wheels, and I can testify to that. For several years, we raced vintage bikes at the Barber Museum. I don't know if you folks have ever been to the Barber Museum, but I highly recommend it. It's probably one of the best museums in the world. And every October they have a race, 2.3 miles, 1 or 2 laps on their road course, up and down hills, around curves. And I'll guarantee you one thing, I never won on a Harley, I always won on an Indian. And in the day, Indian claimed, actually I believe it was in 1913, 60 miles in 60 minutes. And in 1913, the competition, there weren't many of them even going 60 miles an hour, no less for 60 minutes straight. So the reliability of this engine was actually pretty good if it was well prepared and well tuned, and that means you had to have Oscar Headstrom in the pits. And he wasn't there for everybody, he was just one guy. So my good friend, the late Harry Suker, the author, I was just studying his book the other day to really be able to talk about this motorcycle. The years 1915 to 1923, Harry has categorized for Indian the Great Decline. And although they were still manufacturing plenty of bikes in Springfield, Massachusetts, they were really losing a lot of traction. One of the reasons Indian took part of the Great Decline is they heavily invested in World War I in supplying the United States government with motorcycles several years after this was built. Harley-Davidson and Excelsior did build military motorcycles, but they focused really on their dealer network, keeping even in any supply, their dealers supplied with motorcycles, knowing the war would eventually be over, and then they would come out of it on top. And that theory did work. Indian, of course, lasted until 1953, and they're back again with great power. It's not the same Indian, but it's got the same name. Now, this motorcycle itself is called a Model D1. It was built in very limited production. You can read about it in Harry Suker's book. It is also listed in other books with Indian nomenclature in it. It's a short coupled bike, so it has no transmission. In this area here, you'll see pedals. On a lot of bikes, like the Thor behind me, you would pedal start that. This machine doesn't have a pedal starting mechanism. We're going to start it with this bike. In the day, this motorcycle probably would have been push started or tow started on a race. If you look at the big poster to my right on the wall, that's a board track from 1917. And those motorcycles, a bike like this, would probably run 90 to 100 miles an hour. If you look at the AMA records held by Indian behind me, and there's another poster over there, Indian wins. You can look at the lap times. They were absolutely incredible. Also, behind me, a great artifact at Wheels Through Time, and that's the Indian motorcycle crate from 1909. It was found in Indianapolis, Indiana. One of my favorite museum visitors was in today, brought me an article about the famous Cannonball Baker, who lived in Indianapolis, as well as the famous board track racer named Jim Davis. And it's a suspicion of many that was either owned or remained in Jim Davis's garage or Cannonball Baker. Now, anybody heard of Cannonball Baker? Let me tell you a short story. You might have read a little bit in Motorcycle World about the Cannonball Run, a race cross country, old motorcycles. Well, that name came from Cannonball Baker. Interestingly, and a very short story, because I'm running out of time and everybody wants to hear this thing run. In 1915, Cannonball Baker rode an Indian not like this. It was actually more of a road model with a 3-speed transmission, and he set the transcontinental record from New York to San Francisco. And when he got to San Francisco, he was a record breaker like none other. Indian had just developed the updated engine, the Power Plus engine. And the engine, the Power Plus engine, would actually fit in the same frame. So a Power Plus would fit there's a poster on the wall right over there of the Power Plus, and you can see how entirely different that engine is. So what the Indian factory did is they shipped a Power Plus motor to San Francisco, and I can't remember the name of the dealership that installed the engine, but the engine was immediately installed, and Cannonball Baker further went on that week, and he set the Canada to Mexico record. It's called a 3-flag record: Canada, United States, and Mexico with the Power Plus. So back-to-back records, cross-country on a Headstrom, and then south country, north to south on a Power Plus. So that's my short history lesson. And without further ado, we're going to make this thing happen right now. And it's going to get a little bit smoky in here. I'm going to tell you that right now. So if anybody has an affliction of breathing, better cut out of here pretty quick. So the process is I'm going to crank up my 36 Harley. You're going to sit on the 36 Harley. And come on over on this side over here. I got to give him some quick instructions on this, because he's an Indian rider, okay? When I tell you to put it in gear, you're going to heel it down. And then you put it in gear. Boom. Then you toe it down. Don't jam the toe down. Just articulate your ankle. Yeah. It's all in the ankle, okay? So here we go. Gasoline on, little bit of choke. Hop on there, Daryl. Keep going. Keep going. Good. Thank you, everybody. What's your name?
Brandon.
Brandon. Come on in here, Brandon. He's got his Indian shirt on. He's my throttle man today. That didn't quite work out what I wanted. Brandon had to use the carburetor spray to keep it running. Some kind of malfunction or gum in the carburetor. Daryl, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
It's been a great time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Great job on the Indian shirt. Thank you very much, man.